Hello dear students, now in the last part, we are going to learn how the French Revolution was spread across the different communities of France and how there was a dramatic rise of Napoleon Bonaparte in the state of France.
In the third part, we are going to learn the following topics. We are going to learn, did the woman have revolution? Did the woman play a major part in revolution? Then we are going to learn about a revolutionary woman. Her name was Olympe de Gouges. Then we are going to learn about the abolition of slavery and the revolution and everyday life, and at last we are going to learn about the rise of Napoleon. So let's begin with the first picture. In the first picture we have the topic, did women have revolution? From the very beginning, women were active participants in the events which brought about so many important changes in French society. They hoped that their involvement would pressurize the revolutionary government to introduce measures to improve their lives. Most women of the Third Estate had to work for a living. They worked as a seamstress or laundresses, sold flowers, fruits, and vegetables at the market, or were employed as domestic servants in the houses of prosperous people. Most women did not have access to education or job training. Only daughters of nobles or wealthier members of the Third Estate could study at convent, after which their families arranged a marriage for them. Working women had also to care for their families, that is, cooking, fetching water, queue up for bread, and looking after the children. Their wages were lower than those of men. In order to discuss the voice in order to discuss and voice their interest, women started their own political clubs and newspapers. About 60 women's clubs came up in different French cities. The Society of Revolutionary and the Republican Women was the most famous of them. One of, one of their main demands was that women enjoy the same political rights as men. Women were disappointed that the Constitution of 1791 reduced them to passive citizens. They demanded the right to vote, to be elected to the assembly, and to hold political office. Only then they felt their interest to be represented in the government. So this is how the women have done the activities, the political activities, in order to have balance with their men counterparts. So this is how the woman had contributed for the revolution. Now we are going to learn about a revolutionary woman. Her name was Olympe de Gouges. Olympe de Gouges was a revolutionary French woman, and he had demanded the basic rights for women. For example, she had demanded the equality to man. She had also demanded the rights to liberty, property, and financial security for the women. She had also demanded the representation of women in public services and equal treatment of men and women in the court of law. Okay, so now we are going to learn about the abolition of slavery. As you must be knowing that France was one of the most powerful colonial power country. So like Great Britain, France had also its colonial countries in Africa. So France wanted to abolish the system of slavery. So throughout the 18th century, there was a little criticism about slavery in France. The National Assembly held long debates about whether the rights of man should be extended to all French subjects, including to those in the colonies, but it did not pass any laws, fearing the opposition from businessmen whose income depended on the slave trade. It was finally the convention which in 1794 legislated to free all slaves in the French overseas possessions. This, however, turned out to be the short-term measure. 10 years later, Napoleon reintroduced slavery. Plantation owners understood their freedom as including the right to enslave African Negroes in pursuit of their economic interest. Slavery was finally abolished in France and in French colony in 1848. Now let's we learn about the revolution and everyday life. So how the French Revolution had impacted the everyday life. One important law that came into effect soon after the storming of Bastille in summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship. In the old regime, all written material and cultural activities, books, newspapers, plays could be published or performed only after they had been approved by the censors of the king. Now the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be natural right. Newspapers, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded the town of France from where they traveled rapidly into the countryside. They all describe and discuss the events and changes taking place in France. Freedom of press also meant that opposing views of events could be expressed. Each side sought to convince the other of its position through the medium of print. They played the song, festive processions, like to attract the large number of people. This was one way they could grasp uh, the ideas such as liberty, justice, and equality, and they wrote these ideas for in literature to educate the people in France. So the revolution and everyday life was well connected through the journalistic activities like literature, pamphlets, and in newspapers. Now we are going to learn about the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte. The rise of Napoleon Bonaparte was a very dramatic phenomenon. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself as an emperor of France. He set out to conquer the neighboring European countries, dispossessing the dynasties and creating kingdoms where he placed members of his family. Napoleon saw his role as a modernizer of Europe. He introduced many laws such as protection of private property and uniform system of weights and measures provided by the decimal system. Initially, many saw Napoleon as a liberator who could bring freedom for the people, but soon Napoleonic armies came to be viewed everywhere as an invading force. He was finally defeated in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, many of his measures that carried out the revolutionary ideas of liberty and modern laws to other parts of Europe had an impact on people long after Napoleon had left. The ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of French Revolution. This spread from France to the rest of Europe during the 19th century, where feudal systems were abolished. Colonized people revoked the idea of freedom from bondage into their movements to create sovereign national state. Tipu Sultan and Rajaram Mohan Roy are the two examples of individuals responded the ideas coming from the revolutionary France. So dear students, here the topic of French Revolution is